whatever, we'll go for it. And if it all, goes south, then it all goes south. All right. So theoretically, we're on the tubes now. I actually just got the little thing that said your internet connection is unstable. So if anybody wants to share the link on YouTube,
move to your phone.
Oh, and did Karl get booted?
Yeah, I got it too.
Hang on.
That thing went off to try and fix his audio.
I'll keep an eye out for Karl. Oh, okay. So, I'll keep an eye out for him, and if he comes back in, I can't multitask very well, so I apologize for that, Karl. But we'll try. Once we get rolling, we'll make sure we get him back in again. So, I'm going to try to roll this video for the 14th time I've tried to do this, and see if I can actually make it work for a change. Click the little things, hit this.
Yeah, well, that's like just your opinion, man.
All right, so there we go. I actually got it to work. Thank you, Dave Rittenhouse, for the intro video audio. And welcome to the Audio Opinion Show, where a bunch of audio guys sit around and talk about their opinions about stuff. So everybody that's here, be on your best behavior, because I have ones of viewers, sometimes threes. So, we gotta, mind our P's and Q's. Quick intros, just so anybody that's watching who might not know the folks, kind of what we do. So Dave's a sound reinforcement A1 guy. Mac, audio plumber guy, is a sound reinforcement guy and now kind of a broadcast guy, A1 guy. Andy's a sound reinforcement guy and a programmer guy. Ike is a sound reinforcement guy and now an RF tech guy. Jesse is a sound reinforcement guy. I'm sensing a theme. Nathan is kind of an all-around production guy. And Tobias, I'm guessing, because I didn't ask you earlier, what's kind of what's your primary, like in audio, like what's your primary field?
Pretty much same thing, like sound reinforcement, A1, a little bit of studio these days.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, all of us that are in sound reinforcement are all like, well, we used to be in sound reinforcement. Now, not so much.
We were just
all right. So we're going to start out, first of all, with our poll. So the poll starts, what is your favorite Princess Bride quote? There are 6 options for those of you who can't see on the screen in YouTube land. The 6 options are inconceivable, or boo, boo, bow to her, queen of putrescence, or marriage. Marriage is what brings us together today. Or hello, my name is Indigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Or as you wish, which touches our hearts. Or have fun storming the castle. So we the votes are in. I'm going to pick one. And
can I pick 3?
You cannot pick 3. You're not allowed to. No, don't change the rules. You don't come here enough to be able to come in and change the rules. Like, that's not how this works. All right. So I've shared the results, and it looks like have fun storming the castle is the favorite by a nose. I can't believe nobody went with marriage.
That's not the best quote.
It's like literally like one of my favorites. Like,
that's not the best. That's not the best.
I don't know. Marriage. When the first time I saw that movie, it was in the theater, and I won't. Go ahead. Yeah, the best quote is. But anyway, so now we all know how the polls work.
It doesn't mean what you think it means.
You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think.
Super delayed.
So all right, so we're gonna like move on to actual audio stuff. So here's our choices. Go ahead. My internet is going to crap, so we'll see. I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but I'm just gonna keep going. So our first topic is looks like we are getting votes, so that's good. Bottom snare mic, essential or stupid. I keep bringing that one up because eventually we're going to hit it. Mono PA, stereo PA, LCR. What do we like? On-off versus mute buttons on consoles. SM58 versus anything but an SM58. Let me let Karl in. Our favorite console, and maybe more importantly, our least favorite console. And crank up Genie Towers. Are they the spawn of the devil? you can tell by the way I wrote the question that I might have an opinion. So I'm going to vote mine, and Karl just popped in, but I think I'm just going to go with it because, yep, we have a clear winner. So share your results. Sorry you had to wait there, Karl. So it looks like we're going to be talking about mono PAs versus stereo PAs versus LCR versus exploded left-right versus any other options that you guys want to bring up as something that would be interesting. That's not the one I picked. So I'm going to, Karl, can we hear you now? Have we sussed you out that we can hear you?
Yeah, I think
Awesome.
we're good.
Oh, you sound mellifluous.
Better now? Good.
You sound awesome.
Good.
I'm gonna pick on Andy and make him lead us out. What is your the real Andy? You tour, you see different theater systems, what do you like? What do you hate? What if you could perfect storm? What would you want?
Wow. I like to listen to stereo, of course. But the nature of the beast is that you kind of have to be mono to get the same sound every location. I always liked the idea of possibly creating a left-right sort of thing using delay, but never got to the point where I could figure out a way to kind of use that properly, like an imaginary positional thing using delays. But generally, I guess most things are mono, slight panning, and stereo as hard pans on reverbs because they just sound better that way. That's about it.
Well, and
That's not a mono PA if you got hard pans on reverbs.
It's true.
That's stereo.
But okay, mono
now you're just being contrarian. Yeah, but I will say, is anyone going to walk out of your show angry because they only heard half of the reverb? Is that really it was only every other sample? It was not
any more that they're going to walk out of an orchestra when they're sitting down near the stage on one side and they hear the cellos and basses much more than they hear the violins. It's real life is not the same mix at every seat either. It's that's a specious argument that it has to be mono to get the same mix to every seat, because real life is not the same mix to every seat.
Well, I was going to mention that back in the day, Brian May, they toured with a stereo PA because he used to do that Echoplex thing that went left and right.
Yeah.
But I got, being a guitarist, I did sit on the left side and get pissed off because I couldn't hear the right side. So,
well, and I
but
think
if you were playing violin in an orchestra and what you heard was violins, because you're sitting in a sea of them,
yeah,
and the basses are on the other side of the stage.
They have orchestra shells to bounce that all around, don't they?
Yeah, that's like Hollywood Bowl. That's
kinda,
happens
but
at Hollywood Bowl.
I mean, using the orchestra as an illustration is kind of cheating because you're really following a conductor. But it is a good argument but then I would, kind of my counter argument would be, I think that we do completely different things from a sound reinforcements, or let me even go one step deeper than that. We present musical experiences in completely different ways depending on the content. If it's a rock band, people are accustomed to hearing everything. It's 5 people. And if it's like you love listening, if you're like, oh man, that guitar player is awesome. Now, that being said, it's interesting because, whatever, stereo doesn't mean you don't hear things.
Well, and,
it's just not the same at every seat.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the thing. It's like, it's not the same at every seat. So is that okay? Or how far to the extreme of not the same at every seat is okay?
Well,
I would say,
take a modern example. The Stones on their Filter tour actually had a 3-position PA. So they had a big, gigantic center fill that carried out all information. And then they had left and right that carried left and right information. But the effect was wherever you were sitting in the audience, you heard everything. You heard it as a cohesive mono thing, but they did that for, You know,
Well,
I'll defer to Dave on those because I don't know why they did that way.
back to Pink Floyd touring in quadraphonic,
Yeah.
or even the more modern day Roger Waters doing The Wall, which was in a pseudo 5.1.
And now L Acoustics and D&B are all about immersive.
I think the immersive stuff like really solves this problem. I only heard a demo. I don't know how many of you guys have actually had the chance to mix or really hear a concert with this stuff, but I think it kind of shuts down this whole debate. And if it becomes something that's ubiquitous, but it solves this whole problem.
Which demo did you hear, Alyssa or D&B's
Soundscape?
I heard the
Soundscape,
D&B
yeah.
Soundscape. Yeah, I heard Soundscape at the shop, but it was like it was the most impressive audio technology thing that I've heard. And you know, array processing and the latest GSL boxes. It's like, yeah, that's cool or whatever. But this was kind of like a game changer. It really solved this problem that everybody's been talking about for years about broadcasting stereo information to a huge audience. It's I don't know. It's a game changer.
Where did you hear this demo in? What size room?
Well, it was a small room. It was their thing at D&B in North Carolina, their warehouse.
They did a pretty nice presentation on that at Practical Sound Tech, Practical Show Tech. I don't even know the name of my own website.
He's done so many shows. He's like, it's Pat Sajak going, welcome to Wheel of Good Stuff.
Yeah. 52 2-hour shows.
Yeah.
So Jesse, you're saying that this new system is solving the stereo argument by.
Well, I have not heard.
I
have not heard the D&B system. I've heard the L Acoustic system. And
I'm assuming that it's the same technology and the same thing, more or less, just a different brand.
Yeah, I don't know. Because L Acoustics won't really tell you much about it unless you're a customer, I think.
Well, D&B told us all about it, but it's very complex. I mean, I understood a small portion of the actual, physics and technology that goes into it, but just hearing it really does kind of antiquate this whole debate about getting stereo image out to the audience. I
did an immersive audio job a year or so ago at Bell Labs, and where we had like a chamber ensemble, maybe 12 pieces in the anechoic chamber at Bell Labs.
I remember actually you showed us the pictures of that with all of the
and the playback was in a room with 64 Genelec 8020s, and the processor was I can't remember the name of the manufacturer now. It was called a Wave 1. It's a computer with MADI in and MADI out, and you can have 64 inputs to it and 64 outputs. And in this case, they used the 64 outputs to drive the 64 speakers, and you map them all in CAD to the space you've got where the speakers are all placed. And then you can take any sound and move it in 3 dimensions anywhere in that room.
That's what it
or
is.
Anywhere out of that room. You could take an instrument and move it way outside the room, and it gets farther away, and the timbre changes and the reverb changes so that it actually sounds like you just put it 30 feet outside the walls without the wall being there.
Yeah, the thing that I really want to hear, and from here I'm going to Dave, because Dave has been having an apocalyptic fit over there trying to get a word in edgewise. So I'm going to let him get whatever his word in was. But the thing that I still, I haven't seen and would love to see is how this expands up to a large scale. Dave?
Well, I think the big point to this is with immersive sound, it's content driven. You can't take a band, let's say Blink 182, and make them immersive. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't work. You don't have the same, you don't have the amount of instrumentation to move.
I think, I mean, not to interrupt you, but I think that's a huge, what you just said was huge, because at the end of the day, it's like, there's 5 people on stage, and are playing, you know, 2 guitars and a key, whatever. You know, it's how much spatial definition do I need to make?
What I noticed when I heard it was, I mean, their demo, they did the orchestral stuff, but also they did like some 4-piece quartets and jazz bands and stuff. And it's even with just the imaging, even if you're just listening to a vocal, the way that it places the vocal in the center of the mix, or it places any element in the center of the mix, whereas opposed to, I mean, if you're even listening in your living room or in a studio and you move your head 6 inches to the left, you're going to hear that center pan thing shift. And it really makes you able to place something consistently in the center of the mix, or left or right or whatever. So I might actually buy a ticket to see Blink 182 with Soundscape. I'd like to hear it.
Can we go back to Dave and you just elaborate more? Because
Yeah, sorry, because I
Sorry
cut you off too.
Dave.
But no,
Yes.
I interrupted. That was completely me. I fall on that sword. Go, Dave.
Had the chance to actually play with any of the immersives, but I've really wanted to. I think in a large space, like an arena or something like that, I think the amount that you can make happen is great, because if you go back to what like Pink Floyd was trying to do in the late 70s, early 80s with quadraphonic, that's the first step of it. And that was very, very, very cool, because you could move stuff around, special effects, keyboard stuff around. And then we moved up into 5.1, and there were some tours that did 5.1.
Tom Petty.
What's that?
Tom Petty did a 5.1.
Yeah, I believe he did. I did not get to catch that, but those elements have just springboarded into this immersive aspect. And I think it's a really great step forward. I still think it's very content driven, but getting back to the original point of mono, stereo, or even 5.1 or an immersive.
Well, or LCR, which was in the thing. And the only reason I'm even bringing that up is just because that was kind of 5.1 before 5.1 was 5.1, but go ahead.
I've done LCR in corporate settings, often in very wide spaces, and it's worked out really, really well.
No,
but
I have to get a drink.
Yeah.
I'm going to argue with everybody unless I get a drink in me. So I'll be right back with some bourbon.
That's quite all right. That's it's the happy hour show, so that's fine.
We're all about good bourbon. But yeah, no, just my take on it is exactly that. I think it's very content driven, but to get back to the original point, mono versus stereo, even the only way I look at, I mean, I always want at least a stereo PA. I want things to move. I want to try to make them move as much as possible. I want the audience perspective. If I can sit in front of house and make somebody's head turn in the audience, I feel like I've done my job to some degree to make that more immersive, even in a stereo aspect.
Just blast them with some feedback. They'll all turn around. Don't worry.
Yeah, they'll all, trust me, you'll have everybody's attention then.
They'll turn around and look at you.
It's all turn around.
I heard sorry, I've talked enough. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to say that I actually remember like when the LCR thing kind of, and it was, I think, and Mac knows far better than I do on this, but it seems like it mostly kind of came out of sort of a theatrical kind of a scenario, and I wanted to like it a lot more than I did the few times that I actually used it. And I'd love to be able to quote you chapter and verse of why I ended up kind of going, but I don't really clearly remember. Now, I have done exploded left-right that I liked, where, you know, I had enough of a wraparound, and so it was just an every other left-right thing just to give, and then doing kind of subtly stereo things, like nothing that's going to be so dramatic that there's going to be a seat where somebody can't hear the guitar, but, you know, to increase the number of seats that will at least get something that's got some space to it that it might not have already had.
That's an important point.
I was up at Dear Evan Hansen. We saw that play up in New York. That was mixed in 5.1, and we were 8th row center, and it was outstanding. And there wasn't a single person in there who had a bad seat, because that sound was just distributed all across that but that's a very fixed environment and very repeatable. And it was also acoustically, it was treated acoustically enough so that, you know, all these errant sounds that you get in a sports arena are not present. So the 5.1 made sense there. I think if you go into a sports arena or any canaverous place, you're going to end up like Andy said, you're just going to end up in feedback world if you're bouncing sound around. That's my opinion.
Karl, because I heard Karl's voice pipe in, and I always like hearing Karl. So,
well, yeah, I mean, the thing about space, I mean, I was mixing in stereo in the 90s, but it was a soft pan, kind of what others have described. And it was also, you said exploded stereo. We were playing around with the idea of, you know, right, left, right, you know, just so that everyone got some space. And I always found it easier to mix, especially, you know, I did mostly big band at that time. So it was easier to create a little bit of space. I mean, if everything is just mashed together, you can certainly create a mix with vertical, you know, feeling based on your, you know, the frequencies and all that. But a little bit of stereo always gave a little bit of space. And someone mentioned reverb, and that's another, you know, just a little bit of reverb tail that has some space to it instead of just mashed up in center, but nothing wide. And I always tried to think about what the majority of the audience is going to hear. And, you know, the example of the orchestra that came up early on, you know, as an orchestra musician and someone who's been to a lot of those concerts, of course, most of those are 100% acoustic, and most of what most people are hearing in the audience is a blend, you know, but it never sounds like one giant mashed up thing coming out of the center. It always sounds like a blend.
It also means that the sound is coming from where you see it. That, you know, if you're hearing the cellos,
the brain gets
they're
involved.
over in the cello section. If you're hearing the bass, they're coming from the bass section. And it's so
that's right.
Follow on,
it's not truly stereo.
Yes, that's why you need stereo when you're doing, you know, when people are looking at a big wide stage with a bunch of people on it, and the guitar player's over on stage right, then pan the guitar over that way a bit, because that's where it's going to look like it's coming from. I think people tend to forget that it's humans that are making the sound to begin with. And if you just start with the PA instead of the humans, you're going to start to say things like, it ought to be mono so everybody hears the same thing. I don't agree with that. Back to you, Karl.
No, you know, you and I are totally on the same, you know, wavelength there. I mean, I think that people should have an experience. It shouldn't, you know, but, you know, pure stereo itself is really something for the home. I mean, honestly, just that sort of listening where you're sitting in any spot and you're hearing this really nice wide sound stage in a big live environment, you know, you can't quite match that, because a lot of people aren't going to hear that. If they're over to the left, they're going to hear mostly the left speaker, and over to the right and so on. But you can create space that gives them somewhat of an illusion. When they're watching the guitar player, it's like their mind can tune into that. And as long as it's not coming out of the right side, you know, if the guitar player's on the left and they hear it out of the PA on the right, that's a problem. So you know, just creating some amount of space really helps them with that illusion, I think.
Hard panning isn't what stereo is. Hard panning is just bad mixing.
Right.
You know,
I agree. Yeah.
It's not.
Need another drink.
But I agree with him. I agree. And well, I will say it's bad mixing most of the time. And they're all, it's that whole thing of like almost everything, there's an exception, you know, I won't like pick on you, but yeah, you know, there's some exception that's like, oh yeah, no, it was this particular thing and it was actually the perfect thing to do. But I do agree.
I'm sure there's a place where Karl's mashed up mono is the right thing too, but I haven't run into it yet.
Right.
He's also kind of, go ahead, Dave.
Well, it wasn't Dave, it was Nate, but go ahead, Dave.
Whatever. The earlier, I'll bring this up because I think it's important. The early Beatles records in mono, they sound so much better than in stereo.
That's because nobody knew how to pan shit back then. They put drums on the left and vocals on the right.
But
I won't interrupt.
There's an actual full story to that, but it's big way too long.
Right.
I'm sure there's a ton of backstory to that.
I think Dave
finish your. I'm sorry. I'm going to do traffic cop just because we have just enough people because I want to hear everybody's comment. So Dave, finish your thought, and then I'm going to literally bing, 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 so we get everybody.
My thought was just basically that is how they were intended to be mixed, because that's how they even recorded them. That was the intent, was mono. And they went back.
And Andy, tell us a little, because I think I know the same thing that you do. Tell us a little bit about the backstory of why some of the Beatles stuff. If only you worked for a Beatles tribute band and like had some clue. That'd be cool.
Well, basically, yes, it was intended to be mixed in mono, but when they sent the tracks over to the Americans had a different idea of what it should sound like, so they needed things to be split apart. Typically, vocals in one track and instruments on another track. Back then, it was 2-track was all there was, 2-track or 3-track in those days.
That was also Capitol Records who made those decisions.
Right, and against the wishes of George Martin.
Yep.
He talks about it quite a bit. So you know the backstory as well. So essentially they took it and they panned those 2 signals hard left and right, and then added a bunch of reverb to things and basically made a mess of it as far as George Martin's concerned. Now I grew up listening to them that way, and I always remember the sound of the albums being that way, and I always thought it was a really unique and interesting sort of thing. And you heard a lot of early 60s music done that way. And I tried mixing some of the shows that way, but you run into this problem where, you've got a vocal on the far side. It just doesn't work in some of these theaters, and you're not using your own equipment every day. It's very difficult to control. So you end up having to do little panning, but you can't do a lot.
If you were doing a really like extremely controlled environment or a very small space, it would probably be interesting for a lot of the Beatles fans if you were able to reproduce that. I very short story, but I had like no real stereo growing up and no real record collection, but my neighbor did, and he went on a trip and he let me house sit for him when I was like 13, 14, and I remember like taking out his Beatles record, I don't even remember which one it was, and sticking it on the turntable and playing it for the first time on it. He had like a big boy stereo, and that whole like experience of like drums coming from over here, and then like, and it was freaking cool. I'm sorry, but it was weird, but it was freaking cool. And I still remember like, that is really odd, but really interesting. But of course I had no idea what the backstory of it was, or why it ever happened.
That's part of how I got in the business. I mean, maybe that's what influenced you, but Sgt. Pepper's, I played it and I started noticing that the sounds were coming out of the different sides. So I actually made a little switch box. So instead of having to turn the pan on my stereo, I could just turn the channels on and off and listen to just what was coming out of them. And, part of what hit me was, somebody decided this. Someone, there was someone who was saying, okay, we're going to put this sound over here and this sound over here. And, along with listening to a lot of pop records and wondering about the source of these decisions, it's like, wait a minute. So there's someone not in the band who is deciding this. Who is that? I mean, that started the question for me. I was a teenager at the time, and here I am. I'm still in the business today, because you start realizing, and then you come to realize, hey, there's technology behind this, and there's a mix engineer and a recording engineer, and that was my origin. To get into all this.
I know that feeling of not knowing exactly what the job was, but wanting to do it, and that was one thing. But also, I still occasionally will listen to just one channel of a stereo mix. A lot of times it's because when I'm using my Apple things to make a phone call, I only like to have one in. And then when you hang up from the call and it automatically starts iTunes, you go, oh, or, sometimes I'm fixing something and so the stereo, what I'm playing back is only going through the other channel of the setup or whatever. But I find listening to just one channel of stereo mixes sometimes very educational, to just hear what's just over there on one side.
Yeah, it is interesting way to like separate things out. And like I relatively recently was back listening to the earliest Van Halen records. Which were mixed like you were looking at the stage.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, dead on, like you were looking at the stage. Like there's Eddie right there, and there's like, I mean, it was like, that's the way they mixed it. And I grew up listening to that stuff in my crappy car stereo, where I never really heard that difference or paid much attention because I was too busy going, dude. Now it's like, oh, that's like super interesting, and like oh, there's some slapback echo going to the other, but no, like very clearly, Eddie is standing, stage left with his stack, and like I can hear exactly what's going on. Tobias, I'm going to pick on you because you're the new guy and you're the only person who hasn't weighed in, and yet these people will just talk all over top of you.
Oh,
if I
that's
don't.
fine.
So,
My job.
I love the mono button on my controller when I'm sitting in the studio to see what's actually happening. But I would be interested to see if any one of those gentlemen actually mix on a mono, like a true mono PA these days in terms of music.
You mean
Only for the first, 5 years of my career. That's all there was.
But it is
Right.
done. I mean, wasn't there a big U2 tour a few years ago? I forget. Maybe it was called Pop or whatever.
Yeah,
The
I was going
quad
to bring that
tour
one up.
mixed
Yep.
in
And it was
mono.
a giant mono cluster. That was it. It's
Yep.
just a huge, amazing sounding mono mix.
Clusterfuck. Oh,
So
and Andy
Maybe.
gets
And it was
the
you
first
instead of me,
F-bomb
Andy.
of the show. But well, it's funny because like I remember that because I was probably at RCI with Dave at the time when that tour came out, and it was in all the papers, like it was like a huge deal because it was like U2 goes mono and everybody like lost their freaking minds. And all I was thinking is like every show I mix is basically mono. It's two stacks of speakers, but maybe 3% of what I'm doing is stereo, maybe 5%, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10% on a really crazy day. But almost everything I'm doing is mono anyway. But yeah, at this point, until we get to like true immersive where you don't see speakers at all, like you couldn't do a concert with a center cluster and nothing else. It's, they proved it basically, like everyone just lost their gourds, just because visually it was like, this is too crazy. And unfortunately visuals are sometimes, a big part of what we do. It's like,
you know what? An interesting part of that U2 tour that they mixed in mono is that Dallas, who is the Edge's guitar tech, had to go through the whole system because he uses I think he's up to about 45 effects. And a lot of them are in stereo and they count on the stereo. When they went to that mono mix, everything started canceling out in that center cluster.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because everything was hitting and it just went out of phase. And
Hence Tobias wanting to check with his mono button because mono compatibility, hardly anyone checks that anymore.
And probably should be. I mean, Tobias brings up a really, really good point from a studio standpoint, which is, for quite a while there, we didn't really need to worry that much about mono because almost nothing was being, but we're kind of circling back to that now. You got a lot of folks that are just like, they're listening on their iPhone or, whatever, and they don't have a stereo speaker. They don't have a whatever. And, or they've only got one ear, but they're doing one ear.
Two kids sitting on the subway sharing one pair of earbuds.
Right.
I always say, how do you mix for that?
Right. Well,
I've always kind of
there's people not getting the same left-right mix, but they're not getting any mono problem. They're not getting cancellation from summing to mono though, because
they're actually mono.
Hearing half of stereo.
At the local amphitheater around the corner from me here, which I do a lot of work at, how many times do you create a stereo mix, but then you're sending a mono feed out to the lawn?
Right.
Now, a great example of this is for all of us around the Metro DC area, and remember the band Kix. I'm not going to mention their engineer, but
the deaf guy.
Yeah. But he had his left and right. He had the right out of phase from the left. Now, when you're on a big system, you can't always tell that right away. But the minute you mix that down to mono and it cancels everything and you walk out to the lawn, it was a disaster. And you're like, oh, hey, let me go back in here. And oh, yeah, see this?
You're going to want to fix.
Hopefully, if you're in the middle, you can hear it because it really makes a weird pressure thing in your head.
I've heard a lot of YouTubes that have been done that way, where you fire them up on your stereo, you're listening to them, they go, "Oh my God, that's out of polarity." It's
right.
And if you're using a full range system, I mean, your bass has got to suck if it's out of phase like that,
Right.
any amphitheater nowadays are you actually mixing center.
Yeah, well, there's that, and admittedly, like, you know, not to circle back to another one of our topics, but you know, if you're using aux-fed subs, then your subs are going to be mono anyway. But
as they should be,
as they should be, as it should be. Anybody who disagrees can just like step off, because no. Go see our other show.
There goes Nathan.
But I will say, like, telling on myself, I had this like guitar processor rack that I carried around with me for years. I think Dave may have even seen it. It was like the magic rack for my guitar.
Borg delay. God, I miss that.
And but like, I made recordings with it. It's my acoustic rig, you know, whatever. I did all kinds of stuff with it. And then finally, like one time I was like, it, you know, for whatever reason, I did something where it collapsed it into mono. And it was only then that I realized that like I had wired one of the like patch cables inside the rack out of polarity. And it had been out of polarity for years. And, you know, I was either, you know, plopping down on a stage somewhere and people were only taking one output, so it was fine, or they were going stereo and going full stereo, so it was fine, like you said, unless you literally, Mac, were standing, you know, right in the dead center, then it was weird, but nobody was there. But it was amazing how long it went until I finally, and I still got like old recordings, like just solo acoustic stuff that I pop it on and I go, man, the stereo image is really well. Oh, that was before I fixed my rack. So it's, you know, that's a whole nother, you know, out of polarity, you know, thing is, yeah, that's a whole nother bailiwick.
I've had tracks before where I was putting pre-recorded tracks in a monitor wedge, and everything sounded fine in the PA, but they weren't getting tracks in the monitor wedge. And it took me way too long to figure out that this guy who sent me his tracks, they were just totally 100% out of phase. So once I got some of the mono and the aux mix going, same thing as the lawn mix, you know?
Yeah.
But I kind of think that, like, if for the kids that are listening on their earbuds, or for the guys that are listening to the 70 volt systems at Walmart or whatever, if you're listening in mono, I don't think we should sacrifice the quality of our mix for the people that are listening in mono. Because if you're listening in mono, how much do you really care about the fidelity anyway?
Right. Not trying very hard.
Yeah. Good.
Right.
You need to try harder.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting trick for those that you have a Mac. You can go into the settings and set all your audio in mono.
Yes, that's
a good trick.
trick.
You go out on iTunes and you listen to it and you find out who's actually phase checking their mixes. And you'll get all sorts of mixes where everything's canceling and all you get is bass and vocals, and that's it.
All kinds of
I was doing this television variety show back in the earlier part of this millennia, and we did a lot of up and coming artists, and there was this girl singing a track, and her boyfriend was her producer, you know, and he brought the CD and took it out to the truck, and truck engineer's a good guy, and he ingested it into the digicart and he listened to it and it sounded okay to him. We go to rehearse her tracks and it's like and everyone's like, wow, what's going on? You know, like, so why are we stopping rehearsal and all this stuff? And I mean, we were months and months into the show at that point, and somebody finally realized that we had just decided really early on to use just a mono playback line to the floor. And so that's where it was getting monoed. And as soon as the A1 in the truck hit the mono button on the console, it was like, oh, this is it. But so she didn't get to go on. That was it. That was her television career overdone by the rehearsal time. But yeah, it was just, I couldn't believe the amount of cancellation. It was just like everything was gone. Just distortion was what was left.
So I broke my own rule because Jason Glass has shown up in the room. And if Jason's going to be in the room, then I will let him in the room. But
you have to tell him, though, he has to get his camera up higher.
Oh,
I can't.
I don't
have
know.
a Dell.
The up the nose shot. Oh, you got a Dell where the camera's at the bottom of the screen?
Yes, I do.
Oh,
stupidest
awesome.
idea ever.
Where are the stockings on that chimney?
Everything else about this computer is great.
Scott Boltzmann is driving his car, if you guys can't see that.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me join. I just I'm late, of course.
Well, and
about
I
the
and I
mono
knew
thing.
and I'm totally kicking to you, but I knew the reason I let Jason is because I knew, one, he'd been listening and he was like, but, and he wanted to say something, and he probably had something cool to say. So I'm like, all right, we'll let Jason in because he's got something cool to say. So say something cool, or else I look really silly.
Okay, since we're audio engineers and we're talking about mono versus stereo, let's talk about vector scopes.
Oh God.
Whoa, that's old school, man.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's only old school because today's broadcast standard, today's audio transport standard is digital, and in digital you have two discrete audio paths. Of course, before that we had multiplex paths where audio was summed to a complex mid-side multiplex. And
right.
then,
well, yeah, for FM stereo,
Yeah.
well, yeah, and television as well.
And TV,
Right.
yeah.
So then it was demultiplexed at the receiver. Here's the thing. So today, I spent 30 years as a monitor engineer on the road. And one of the things you run into with wireless in-ear monitors is their classic FM stereo multiplexed modulation scheme. And so I was getting a fair amount of calls from clients and friends and strangers. Why are my systems dropping out? And I'd go investigate their systems for them. Everything seemed to be working fine. And what was happening was a lot of these clients rely heavily on tracks. And some of these tracks are mixed in the studio with a young engineer who has, maybe no experience with multiplexing and how phase relationships between left and right can destroy a multiplex.
Oh, yeah.
Recording these tracks, then they go out on the road, they're playing back these tracks, and I have a personal story about this. On a tour with a major, everybody knows who she is, female country music artist.
Who's very
blonde.
tall.
No, not tall. Very blonde, smells really good. Everybody knows who she is. Anyway, so we're out, and
are you talking about my wife? Never mind.
I hope so.
Goodbye.
So anyway, one of our wonderful background singers each night was talking about, she came to me and she's like, there's this dropout. And so I went nuts trying to figure out the system, what's wrong with her in-ear monitors. Did all the RF tricks, went through everything, and it was every night. She's like, and it only happens once during the show. Oh, what?
When that one track happened.
When the one track happened.
Yep.
And
her monitors dropped out, and she was the only one who had a really high mix of that one part because that was her cue to do her part, and it was 180 degrees out of phase.
That's amazing. And it's a great example of, a lot of times old technology stuff that we get soft on because we don't have to worry about it anymore.
Right.
Yep. So interesting question I have is, out of all you guys, anybody who's mixing monitors, has anybody mixed stereo monitors?
My whole career since 1993.
Like wedges or in-ears?
No, I'm talking modern in-ears stereo monitors. Are they the phase
only
cancellation problems?
Yeah. In-ears, and that's actually, thank you for a topic, because now he just provided me with another topic that I'm going to put into the queue, because man, if I got a whole thing about like stereo in-ears, and I counsel a lot of church folks, high church folks, if you ever see this in the future, please don't use mono in-ears. Please don't do it. Please don't ever do it. Just don't do it. Please.
Ever.
Don't do it. It's a bad idea. Don't ever do it. If you have to do that, then just go with wedges, or just listen really close to the stuff bouncing off the back wall, because you're going to be better off.
I'm
Hey,
curious.
look.
Is this for another time? But or why are you so opposed to using mono ears if the artists aren't needing
It is literally a longer discussion, but I promise you we will. But we will, or if you want to get with me offline, I'd be happy to give you the whole spiel. There's a spiel to it.
There are exceptions when the 20, 30-year sideman comes to you and says, look, I only use hardwired. I only use mono. I know what I want.
Oh, true. Absolutely.
And I only wear one ear.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the exceptions. It's like, don't only just use one ear. Don't only use one ear unless you're the boss and you want to use one ear, in which case go ahead and use one ear. And I'm good with that. As long as the check's clear.
Don't do it for the newbie.
Customer's always right.
Yeah.
All right.
Subject of multiplex stereo mixes for in-ears, though, if there was only a digital in-ear system that wouldn't have to worry about that.
Nicely played.
If only.
So many, you had to know that was going to come up.
Well played.
Indeed. All right. Well, my beloved Behringer mixer is deciding to take a crap on me, and we're past the 45, and I like to keep these things short. Sorry, Scott, we didn't hear from you, but you were traveling.
I didn't have much to add for
but I thank you for hanging with us. Thank everybody for hanging with us. Jason, thanks for jumping on at the end. Please come earlier next time so that we can hear more of what you have to say. And please get a different webcam, because I don't really want to spend this entire time looking up your nose. That's not
every webcast I've seen him on.
Oh,
there you go.
I'll get an Oxford English dictionary to put my laptop on next time.
I've got mine on a couple of cardboard boxes, and mine has the camera at the top.
Yeah, no, mine's sitting on 5 books. No, there's, we all make do what we have to do. But
always do that.
Thanks to all of you guys for stopping by. We're going to be doing these on Tuesdays. I was going to do them at noon, but I'm going to bump that back to like 1 o'clock on Tuesdays. So we'll go back to 1 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock on Thursdays. And occasionally I'll just send out a link to the folks that have already been on and go, we're going to do one at 3 o'clock today, and it'll just be a pop-up, and we'll just do something spontaneous.
Yeah.
And if it's just me and Mac, then me and Mac will just be, we'll just argue with each other for 45 minutes. And
it'll have to be evenings for me, because I'm just not available any other time.
I was going to say.
But anyway, thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to take us off the YouTubes. So everybody say goodbye to the YouTubes, and I'll figure out how to push the stop.